the 45th gate, gathering together. The right angle cross of rulership. That is the 45 and the 26, the 22 and the 47. Right angle cross of rulership. Each of these four gates represent ruling forces. Gathering together is an extraordinary gate in that it is the only voice for the entire tribal process. It is the voice that says, I have or I don't have. It is the voice of possession. It is the voice of dominion. It is the place of the biological leader. What we would call tribal leader or clan leader. One of the things to recognize in design is that we have two kinds of families. That we have our blood families with our direct physical connection to them. But the longer you live in design, you will see that you have another family that is also a genetic family that is connected to you in a much wider scope. And that the 45 plays its role in that family. It does not play its role in its personal family. It plays out that role in the larger family, that is the tribal family, the larger genetic pool. Natural and generally beneficial attraction of like forces. Now, the first thing to recognize about the 45 on the mundane plane is that the 45 is the voice of our material life. You know, I have this much money and I don't have that much, and I have this property and I don't have that. And everything is about the possessiveness necessary for the material plane and the this and that calculation of the material plane. I have this much, I want this much more. So it has to do with our material direction, and I always use the 45 as a guide in terms of anyone's interest career-wise in their design. The most important thing to recognize about the 45 is that it is a voice that has no motor. And that it's only going to get that motor by being connected in the direct sense, the harmonic sense, to the ego. And at which point it becomes a very unique instrument. After all, this is the only direct throat-ego connection. The ego's power, the ego's motor, its courage, its willpower, not only being able to say I have, but being able to say I will get more. The first line, the nature of what the ruler is. The first line is called canvassing. It says the ability to promote and develop gathering together through the education of the uncommitted. The education of the uncommitted. The first thing to recognize about rulership is that rulership is conditioned by education. If the ruler does not educate, the ruler will fail, will lose its power. Because it is educating of those that makes the real difference. This is where the loyalty comes from. After all, the 45 is an outlet for the material plane, but is not the doer. But what it offers is how manifestation can take place. And manifestation must include education. So that first line is, a material direction lies in education. By the way, if you think carefully, every service industry in the world is an educating industry. Every product that you're introduced to, you have to be educated to it in the first place. Every business tries to educate their customers about what's available and what isn't. The whole material plane is about information. Freedom of Information Act. Put all the stuff on the side of the boxes. Educate, and you get loyalty. Obscure, hide the facts, and then you're considered dangerous. and not a ruler, not a leader that can be trusted. So the first step in rulership is the recognition that in order to be able to rule, those who are being ruled must be educated. That's the benefit that you can bring them. It's also the way to make money. What it's saying is to anybody who has the 45-1 is that if you really want to make a living, you have to recognize that your best way is to teach people something, explain something to them that they do not know, and then you'll be very successful. The Mars and detriment, an overzealousness that turns canvassing into proselytization and tends to alienate rather than gather support. The drive for material that leads to aggressive education. You know, these are the people that hammer at your door and they've got their encyclopedias for you. You know, they can drive you absolutely mad. And yet at the same time, we do need them. We do need them. There is no material success without education. If you look statistically at the world that we live in today, and if you look at education comparisons, the more educated you are, the more money you have. The more educated you are, the more peaceful your society is. I mean, it's all related. The more food that's available, the more jobs that are available, and on and on and on and on and on. It's all rooted in education. So education is the first way to make money. I mean, just think about that. Teaching is the first way to make money. If people don't understand what they're getting from you, you will never have their loyalty. And they will always feel like you're fooling them, that you're trying to trick them. Even in the aggressive sense. You know, even when somebody is really, you know, I can remember in the 60s on television here in the States, these car commercials from these local car dealers. They were really incredible. They had one guy up in Seattle that used to get on TV and smash his cars to pieces in the front lot. Yeah. The second line, 45-2s don't know that they can rule, don't know that they can make money. They're the great worriers. They are. They're the great worriers. I don't know what I can do. And then they run around their house trying to deal with whatever is there in their house. But you know, they have their problems with that. And then somebody comes along and knocks on their door. You know, looks inside at that too and says, hey, but wait a minute. What I see in this window is that you have all this material potential in you. I mean, you're a 45. I can see that. I can see that you could be good doing this. And then they can get pulled into a successful material life. Again, remember, whether or not that's going to work for them is going to be dependent on how they interact with that person who's knocking on their window. And that's going to be according to their design. Gathering together is strengthened by acknowledged common interest. So that's the first thing that I say to the 45-2. I say, look, you're not going to know what to do materially, but somebody is going to come and tell you. And at the moment that they come and tell you, they come and say to you, look, you got a lot of potential to do this. Why don't you work with me? If the common interest is there, it will be very successful. But not if they're being brought into something that they are totally uncomfortable with and ill-prepared for. Uranus exalted. The inventiveness to establish techniques by which common ground can be assessed. Now these people are very good. Material direction through the expression of techniques for the benefit of others. Once these people are brought out, they can help other people get brought out. I mean, that's their great thing. Eh? Once they can open up that window and step out, they can show other people how to do it. They can bring techniques for other people. And of course, what that means is that this is a different kind of teaching. In other words, this isn't the theoretical teaching, but this is practical teaching techniques. So, for example, if you have somebody that's doing, how to use your computer easily, computer for dummies, and you teach a technique, that's perfect for a second line. It's perfect for them. Mars and detriment, an innate rebellion against conformity, the refusal to accept the material techniques of others, of others. Of others. In other words, what the Mars brings into this is that it's my technique. It's not our technique, and I don't want to use your technique. I want to use my technique because my technique makes money. And it's going to make more money than if I use your technique in that sense. It's the immaturity of the Mars. And of course, that may be beneficial or not, again, depending on how you entered into that. Because all second lines, there isn't a single second line that knows what it's supposed to do in this life other than breathe. Breathing, it has down pat. But everything else, it has to wait for that knock on the door. The third line, exclusion. This is a very, very weird line. It just is. The 45 has a natural place in the community, has a natural place in the genetic pool. They are really there to be in charge of the material distribution and education, are there to protect those that are associated with them. And when you come to exclusion, Neptune exalted, the ability when excluded to take whatever measures are necessary to dissolve the antiquated form and to accept even humiliation to achieve inclusion. Now these are people that are always trying to get in from the outside. And they will do everything in their power to get in. It's like having the 45-3 and doing everything in your power to get into a new organization. And they'll do everything they can. I mean, it's trial and error. They'll do everything they can to get inside. And they're really annoyed if they can't get in on the process. And of course, it's a learning thing for them. Nothing wrong with that if how they're entering in is correct. Because then that's exactly the right energy necessary for them to be able to break in. Otherwise, if they don't know themselves, they really feel like a threat to many other people. You can't just push them off. And if they think they're supposed to belong to something and nobody's letting them in, they will drive you crazy trying to get in. That's only when they're not clear about themselves. The Mars in detriment, an aggressive and often violent reaction to exclusion. Remember, the 45 is supposed to be a ruler. And through this trial and error process, they make mistakes and they get excluded. No, you can't tell us what to do. They go nuts. They can get very, very angry. How dare you leave me out? Yeah, I had a recent incident with that. It's quite surprising what that leads to. I had a going away party. Maybe 400 or 500 people. Rather wild evening and morning. And it was an open party, but nobody really knew that. People just come word of mouth. They knew I was leaving the island. And somebody came who thought that you had to be invited, punched me in the face for not inviting him and went away. And he's a 45-3. In detriment. Life is like that. I said to one of my friends, Jesus, thank God I'm still not in America yet. He would have shot me for sure if he had had a gun. For sure. Okay. Fourth line. Direction. The 45 lower trigram has great difficulties in its life. It has difficulties because, of course, this is a private, a personal destiny. And after all, they're there to serve the larger community and often are deeply misunderstood because of that. That, they're not sharing their having. That they're not extending that grace to others. But of course, they are involved in their own process. And when they're involved correctly in their own process, the inevitable result will be beneficial to others. The inevitable result. However, when you come to the fourth to the sixth lines, when you come to the transpersonal here, obviously you've got a different matrix at work. This is the I have and I don't have that's dependent on interaction with others, that can lead to the exaltation of that voice, which is we have or we don't have. Remember, it's very difficult for somebody to have the 4521 in their own design. It's really designed to be an electromagnetic connection so that we is a possible manifestation out of that. It's more successful with transpersonal lines. The fourth line, direction. The ability to focus. Here you see the true influence of the fourth line. The ability to focus. Jupiter, by the way, exalted, the Hierophant, the ruler of the gods. The ability to focus, the opportunity of gathering together for the service of higher principles. Or in the Mars sense. By the way, higher principles, please don't turn that into something sickly sweet. What a higher principle means is that the product you sell is the product you use. That's a higher principle. In other words, as long as your material life, whatever is involved in your material life, is something that you legitimately would bring into your own life, whether that's the product you use or the philosophy that you live by, or whatever the case may be, that's a higher principle. So the service of higher principles, the ability to focus others. This is the beauty of what the 45 is supposed to be. I have many 45s in my life. I tell them, delegate, 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 because that's the real gift. The real gift is to say, look, let me educate you in the way things have to be done, and then you do it. Don't forget the education. Let me educate you in the way things get done, and then you do it. That is really what direction is all about. First education, and then delegation. Then the 45 is very successful, the fourth line, and influential. In the White Book, the expression of higher principles on the material plane. In the Mars and detriment, the tendency to try to influence the direction of a group action for personal benefit. Yeah, so what? You know, it's not like that's a bad thing. It doesn't say that influencing that direction of the group is negative to the benefit of the other. It just means that these people have a little bit of a power trip. Well, you know, power to the black and power to the hip and power to anybody on a power trip. What to do? You know, that's their trip. It's okay. It's okay. As a matter of fact, that gives them their motivation. You know, if I get to direct all these people and we make a lot of money, I'm the big shot. I'm the one up here. I'm going to feel good about myself and everything's terrific. That's okay. It's just the other side of that coin. I mean, you know, the exalted can be real squishy. You know, this kind of benevolent monarch, you know, the enlightened ruler. Whereas the other side is much more what we're used to. Yes, I'm your leader, but pay me. The fifth line, leadership. Again, this leadership, this ruler, this is a ruler that you only call upon in emergencies. The best example today in the world is Cambodia. You know, this is a society that is still living out an incredible madness. And they've got this old, cancer-ridden, dying king, Sihanouk, who has no power. And yet everybody keeps on, every time there's a crisis, and there are crises like once a month, every time there's a crisis, you see all of these characters going out there to see this natural tribal ruler in times of crisis only. Otherwise, I have no use for him. And the same thing is true for the 45-5 as a tribal ruler. It is a ruler in times of crisis. In times of crisis that must come with practical provisions to be successful for the clan, for the tribe. All gathering together must have a center and a focus. But it's not a permanent center and focus. It can't be. No fifth line is ever allowed too long a stay. Because the projection goes both ways. And because they are always a natural resource in times of crisis, when the crisis is ameliorated, that's the moment that nobody wants them around anymore, because people are actually uncomfortable with them. Uranus exalted the intuitive intellect and gift for innovation that enhance the group effort and ensure continuity through respect of the center. The gift for expressing leadership on the material plane in times of crisis. So you got a company that's in trouble. The 45 is the CEO. You got a company that's in trouble, and they bring in an acting CEO to cut costs, to trim everything, to get it all done. They come in with their reputation. They come in to do the job, and when the job's done, they go away. They take their stock options and their bonuses and everything else. They walk away with their $35 or $40 million for their 3 months' work, and everybody's happy. If they stay, they'll make less money, they'll have more problems, and less respect. Jupiter in detriment, a sense of right action that assumes a respect that may not as yet have earned it. And of course, this is very common in children. There's a crisis, the 45-5 child jumps in and says, I will look after this. Doesn't necessarily work. And it's very difficult for people who are in their 20s, for example, to live out their 45-5. It's very difficult. They don't carry with them that authority of rulership yet that carries the necessary respect, and they try to get people to follow them in that sense, and it doesn't really work. It does later. They learn out of that. And finally, a sixth line. This is a kind of allegory of the sixth line travail in life. This reconsideration, the outsider that can admit that its prior rejection was an error will generally be accepted into the gathering. The sixth line is always stepping out. If you have a powerful role position in design, if you are an alpha or you are a ruler or whatever the case may be, and you don't fulfill that, you create a lot of annoyance amongst other people. I know a lot of 31-7s who are constantly being forced to be leaders, no matter what they do. And if they don't play the role of leader, then other people get annoyed with them. They think they're sick. They think there's a problem with them. They think they're unhappy. They keep on insisting that they continue to play their role because that's what's expected of them. So the 45-6 is expected to be a ruler and doesn't rule anything. That 45-6 can be very, very mystical. The 45th gate one day will be a mystical gate. That sixth line can be incredibly mystical because it says that what I have and what I don't have, and what you have and what we don't have, is not up to any of us. It can get to the point where it's sitting on its hill and it says, I'm going to be a breatharian. It may die doing that. I don't have to have anything, it says. I've learned that having is painful and not having is painful, but, I don't have to have anything anymore. This business about the outsider. First of all, the 45-6 is always an outsider and therefore identifies with the outsider mentality. The 45-6 can always see those who are not educated, who need education, who can be of value to the community, of service to the community, and has a capacity to be able to direct them. But the sixth line is best equipped at bringing in the outsider. The one that feels like it has no place in the community, to be able to give it its place. It's like these people, for example, who start businesses and they only give jobs to parolees. This kind of thing where, you get people to reintegrate into the society in a successful way, even though all of those people happen to be outsiders. And the 45-6 has a real grace for that. A lot of the esoteric groups and organizations have 45-6s amongst them. because otherwise you wouldn't be able to bring in all of these outsiders who don't necessarily fit in, and can find a place to bring them in together so that they can be reintegrated into a community and society. So it's a very important role. Doesn't mean they do it right away. Again, this is a long preamble in front of this line. It takes time for that process to mature. First, the burning at the stake has to come. First, that typical 6 line jumping into things, trying to have this, trying to have that, trying to control this, trying to control that, only to discover that doesn't work. And then beginning to watch, to see what having is all about and not having, and how to do something about it. Uranus exalted an innate empathy with the outsider mentality and its eccentric and often misunderstood logic. And the Jupiter in detriment, where Uranus will innovate to find a place for an outsider, Jupiter will demand that it conforms. They're both basically the same thing. But the wonderful gift of the 45-6 is that it can see how anybody can have a place in the material life. In other words, when we look at worldwide, if we look at unemployment, or we look at those that refuse employment in that sense, the 45-6s are of enormous advantage, because it's one of their gifts to be able to understand how the outsider, how the person that really does not fit into the society can have a place. Either have a place where it gets to retain its unusualness but is productive, or it has a place where it has to learn to conform in order to be productive. It's the gift of the 45-6 to make sure that everybody is integrated. Now think about this in just a straightforward mechanical way. The first line says that the ruler must educate as the first thing. But the final thing is that whoever there is, they must have a chance to make a living with dignity. They must. The greatest freak, the weirdest being, the most hopeless case, we have to be able to find a way for them to be able to be productive in our society, to share in the work of the family, and that because the tribal keynote is support, this is the deepest possible support. To educate and to ensure material benefit. So the 45-6 is very important for trying to find a way to get the outsiders involved and productive in society. The juxtaposition cross here. The right angle is the cross of rulership. When you get to the end of the 4th line, you now have the 45-26 with the 36-6 instead of the 22-47. So this is the juxtaposition cross of possession. Its theme being taken from the 45. This is a fixed cross, and everything for these people is about what they have and what they don't have. Everything. My son's a Batman freak, and he loves this, I don't know which character this is. I think it's the Joker, or one of the Riddler, or one of these creatures that always is flipping a coin. These people, this is their life, what they have and what they don't have. What they have and what they don't have. What they have and what they don't have. It's their whole life. It's all about possession. When you get to the left angle cross, it's called the left angle cross of confrontation. This whole business about leadership and reconsideration, this is a left angle cross of confrontation. These are powerful transpersonal forces. And they are able to go out there and to confront the tribe and confront the society. When we get to this point of reconsideration, we get to this theme, very important theme. Everybody has to have a material basis in society. And at the point that it is recognizable that that is possible for the 45-6, that it sees that, its step, its next movement is to go into the 12th gate, into the gate of articulation, in the ability to be able to deal with strangers. So here's this wonderful outsider line, and the next step is the capacity to be able to be social and to be able to deal with strangers.